Hi everyone, welcome back to the Fitness Philosopher podcast. This is your host, Adam Fisher. It's been a while since our last podcast. I apologize, pretty heartily for that one. Just with moving to Seattle, I've had a lot of changes going on in my life, got a new job, so haven't really had the time to get behind the microphone and make another podcast. However, I am pleased to have the opportunity to do so again. And this week, our topic is going to be overtraining. So overtraining is kind of a interesting concept or topic in the fitness community, and actually I've made a video about this before, just a really short one for YouTube, but I'm going to make a longer podcast about it now simply because I think more needs to be said about it. I think that my understanding of it has matured a little bit, and it's come up recently in fitness circles. So to kind of explain overtraining for those who may not know what the topic is, the idea of overtraining is that there is a certain point of exercise which is too much, which is to say that you're just doing too much, you're doing so much that your body actually isn't getting any benefit from it, your body can't recover from it, and you need to take time off in order to continue to see results. And I would certainly argue that there are plenty of people that go into the gym and do too much based on what their goals, based on what they're trying to do. They're simply going to the gym and doing too much of one thing or too much of another thing. But that's not really what we're talking about here. We're talking about literally the idea of overtraining being a training load that is so high that it just totally destroys you, and you're literally not getting anything out of it, which is not the case. People can exercise, and they're doing too much outside of what their goals are. They're doing too much, say cardio, when they really want to be building strength. There are ways, obviously, to do too much of one thing relative to everything else, but the idea that there is simply a level of too much exercise is it's a little more complicated than that. So very frequently, and since I manage an emailing list for an important website, I will say that we get emails all the time saying, hey, if I do X amount of work, will that be overtraining? If I deadlift 3 times a week, will that be overtraining? Or, you make YouTube videos and people go, well, that's just going to be overtraining. There was like the huge thing about Rich Piana's 8-hour arm workout that I did a while back, that everyone was like, oh, well, that's just overtraining. You're not going to get anything out of that because you've done too much. And very often it's also related to the concept of deloading. So the deload in athletic performance circles is basically the concept of the deload is that you need to, in order to peak for performance, you need to take about a week off. And there's scientific reason behind this. Essentially, when you take a week off, you enable your body to reach maximum recovery levels compared to training values, and that allows you to get a little bit better than actually you are in training, so that you can then go to a competition and do better. And this is very important for competitors who have very infrequent contests, such as, for example, myself, a power lifter. I have to lift a maximum weight, maybe once or twice a year, depending on how many competitions I choose to go to. So typically powerlifters they train, they get stronger and stronger. They take a deload week before the competition, they cut back on the volume a little bit, and then while keeping the intensity high, and then you go into the actual competition, and typically you can lift a little bit more than you could a week or 2 weeks before, simply because your body is a little more rested and recovered. Now, other people advocate deloads on a more regular basis. So people advocate doing 3 weeks really hard and then taking a week off, or doing 6 weeks hard and taking a week off. And it's sort of this dogma in sort of bodybuilding and powerlifting circles as well. But it's sort of become this dogma that if you don't take deloads every now and then that's too much, and you're definitely going to go into overtraining. Which, again, isn't really as much of a thing, because the idea is that it's sort of this invisible, you can't really know if you're overtraining. It just happens, like, oh, you're worse than you were before, your performance is suffering, and you're not getting anything out of your training. And of course, you can't really know that you're not getting anything out of your training. Like, what would you be able to tell that would be different? How would it be that you did a workout and then that workout did nothing for you physiologically? How would you know? And very often that sort of uses a mask to cover up the fact that there are, obviously very poorly planned programs out there, and they just kind of hit people hard, and they're not done intelligently, and so you don't get any results out of them because the plan is poorly designed. But you say, oh, well, maybe the reason isn't that the plan was poorly designed. Maybe the reason is simply that I was overtraining. Maybe I needed to rest more or something like that. And then on the other hand, we have like popular figures like C.T. Fletcher. So C.T. Fletcher is a guy who he was a super heavyweight bodybuilder and powerlifter for a while. He's recently become pretty popular because he likes to swear a lot and be really aggressive, and he has his own catchphrases and everything like that. And so he's become kind of popular on YouTube. And he made a video, and several videos really, where he talks about overtraining. And his concept of overtraining is even simpler because he says, oh no, overtraining is a good thing. Overtraining is just what we call getting more adaptation from doing more exercise. AKA, you should always be overtraining. You should always be pushing yourself harder. Like, he's just using it as sort of a euphemism for pushing yourself harder and doing more, which also is not the case. And again, that's not really what overtraining is. So to go into sort of some stuff that recently happened, we had kind of not a Facebook debate, but popped up on Facebook recently because there's a guy, Mike Israetel, that I follow. He's a PhD and he teaches exercise science for a living. So as a professor, of course. So he's a very smart guy. He has very good stuff. I'd recommend, checking him out. So Mike had a status that says, do you believe overtraining is possible? And then he says, well, do you believe that all systems have maximum stress tolerance levels beyond which they cannot adapt, and even higher levels beyond which they are permanently dysfunctional? And the answer, of course, to that is yes. He believes that there are limits. And that's absolutely true. I could keep trying to squat. If I walked into a gym right now and I kept trying to squat heavy, and I just kept trying to squat heavy, and I didn't listen to my body, and I maybe went past my 1 rep max, or I just kept doing singles at 90 until my legs gave out, sooner or later I'd probably break a bone or pull a muscle or something like that. So there is absolutely a limit to how hard you can push yourself in a single day's worth of training. And that's why we have periodized programs, to ensure that we are getting maximum results by ensuring that we have maximum recovery while still having maximum volume at that. So that's maximum recoverable volume is what we call that, which means basically that your maximum recoverable volume would be exactly how hard you can hit yourself while still being able to recover from it effectively in order to be able to do the next workout, say 3 or 4 days later. And yeah, so in that context, maybe you could work out a little too hard, and you might not be fully recovered in 3 days, so you have to take an extra day off to recover. But that's not really overtraining per se. That's just you had a hard workout and you needed maybe an extra day to recover, which throws off your training cycle a little bit, but there's nothing too crazy about that. And then that sparked kind of a debate in Mike's comments and the discussions. And then my other friend Alex Beata weighed in on this. Alex Beata, as I've maybe mentioned before in the podcast, I'm a huge fan of. Alex is into, he's the guy who sort of has revolutionized hybrid training, which is to say that he is hella strong. He squats 600 plus pounds, and he also runs marathons, does bike races, does a lot of endurance work. And he's all about sort of combining those two and doing so in an intelligent way, which is very frequently why people fail to properly do those, because there is typically what we call an interference effect between endurance and strength activities. If you aren't combining them properly, you can typically see that your performance in one or the other suffers as a result of trying to combine the training. So Alex weighed in on this, and he says, there's an interesting discussion on Mike Israel's wall regarding overtraining, and the old argument as to whether or not it's a true identifiable condition or a set of idiopathic symptoms that arise in high-level training environments, or just a load of bollocks. One statement made, primarily tongue-in-cheek, but that I still thought was interesting, was that James Lawrence's 50 consecutive days of Ironmans prove that this can't be a real thing, that overtraining cannot exist if the human body can sustain such a stress. And a quick aside here, James Lawrence, he goes by the Iron Cowboy on Facebook. He did exactly that recently, was that he did 50 consecutive days of Ironmans in a row, and that's, of course, cycling, running, and swimming. And he did it not only in 50 consecutive days, but he did it in 50 different states. So he had very little time to sleep because he was traveling, of course, in between every state each day. in order to be there in the next date for the next day so that he could do the next Ironman. And of course, he succeeded at that. You can learn more about it by, I think he went on a podcast recently with Alex, actually. So you can sort of learn more about that crazy feat of endurance if you want. Just search again, James Lawrence or The Iron Cowboy. So to go back to the quote, he says, "But is this true? My response is, if you'll notice though, his performance was carefully modulated to keep him within recovery parameters. For example, his functional threshold on the bike was around 310 watts. His rides were calibrated to average around 140 to 150 watts, effectively keeping him in the recovery zone for extended periods of time. Modulating his exertion level, minimizing his intensity, and maximizing his recovery kept him right under that line." This drives home one major point. This was not training. This was performance, submaximal performance. Training, almost by definition, is the stressing of physical symptoms, muscular strength, aerobic capacity, or neurological, such as movement proficiency, agility, dexterity, etc., with the intent of forcing adaptation, positive adaptation to the stressor, and therefore improved performance. Training, therefore, is by definition a noxious stress on the body, stress that can push the limits of recovery or exceed the limits of recovery. However, James's endeavor was different. He was operating below his training parameters. He was precisely avoiding stressing any system to the point where significant recovery would be needed, and increased performance was not the goal. By avoiding pushing any of his systems past their existing capacity, he could avoid burnout, and provided sufficient fueling, rest, and avoiding injury, he could sustain performance over time until small injuries and cumulative fatigue and physical damage added up. Which brings up to a point I think I harp on in seminars often. Every system in the body has a given tolerance for stress, and most importantly, every type of training imposes a different type of stress. By constructing a training program that imposes continuous high levels of stress, but also ensures that particular stress varies between sessions, each system can still recover even if overall volume may seem extraordinarily high. This is a common factor in most solid training programs, alternating volume work, dynamic effort, maximum effort, plyometrics, long slow distance, tempo work. By combining these stressors in such a way that each system can recover adequately, the amount of work that can be sustained is astonishing. Stress each system is just enough to elicit adaptation, then ensure that successive training sessions only work that system below its training threshold, allowing recovery. This is why athletes maxing out on days out of schedule is very irritating to coaches. You can squat every day, but if you ensure that the training objective day-to-day changes slightly, you can essentially stay within performance parameters of the majority of your body's systems and only push the limits of a few, which rotate session to session. So basically, Alex is kind of talking about, again, what intelligent training programs are designed around, which is maximizing recovery in specific systems and, again, varying up the different types of stressors so that you are not simply hitting the same stuff over and over again. Because that does typically cause injury, that causes issues with recovery, that causes, reductions in performance. All these things are happening. And of course, again, the idea is that if you're training intelligently, it's very hard to really overtrain per se. Now, the thing is, the problem with the whole debate about overtraining is that very often we are not all talking about the same thing. As you can tell, I haven't really given an exact definition of it thus far. I've kind of explained what it is, and I've given different people's perspectives on it, but I haven't really sat down and said, this is the real definition. So the most exact textbook definition, overtraining as a syndrome or as a set of symptoms, is that it tends to actually resemble depression. These symptoms tend to arise in instances of high performance over a long period of time, typically with endurance athletes, because they have to do volume of endurance training takes up a lot more time relative to high volume and strength training. And it typically involves massive reductions in performance, and it can take weeks or months to recover from. So the idea is that overtraining is not simply just like, oh, I felt bad for a few days, so I took a few days off and I got better. That's not overtraining, that's just acute recovery. Overtraining is, in the long term, not in the acute term, an actual difficulty in recovering over a long period of time, which again results in decreases in performance, measurable decreases in performance, as well as psychological disturbances. So most people are not talking about this. They're not talking about, like, oh, I worked really hard for a while and then I was just totally burnt out for 2 months. They're not talking about that. They're talking about acute recovery to some extent. They're saying, oh, I worked out hard for a few days and then I had to take a few days off. or, oh, I worked out hard for a month and then I had to take a week off. That kind of stuff is probably not overtraining in any sense of the word. So again, it's very debated whether or not overtraining exists. You get these people who sort of say, oh yeah, overtraining is totally real. I have to take breaks all the time, which again, that seems very discredited in terms of kind of what overtraining really is. And then you get people that say, oh, overtraining isn't real. You can work out as hard as you want. Who cares? Just keep hitting yourself harder and harder and harder, and whatever. But the thing is that these guys saying that are typically not the guys who are advocating going into the gym and working out for 8 hours a day without any rest or food, or saying that you should squat singles at 90% until your legs collapse and you break a bone. They're obviously not recommending that, so they aren't really seeing how that could be seen as overtraining. I think it's very probable and likely that overtraining exists, but I also think that if it exists, which again may or may not, we're not exactly sure, it has to be a very rare thing. I think it's very possible to exercise yourself into a position of psychological trauma. I think that is very, knowing that exercise is a stressor and that it can be a very intense stressor, we should know that it's absolutely possible to do so much exercise, so much volume, that we are working ourselves into a position of psychological trauma. That seems absolutely possible. We certainly have stuff like eating disorders. We have orthorexia. We have hypergymnasia, which is, when someone has an unhealthy obsession with working out. There's people who have an unhealthy obsession with thinking that they are not good enough, or thinking that they're too tiny and that they need to get bigger, even though they are bigger than most people. These are all psychological issues that can be caused by exercise. And so I wouldn't say that it's very hard to believe that. It's very possible that we could have some sort of exercise-induced depression or other serious psychological disturbance as well. And I think that it would also be rare because it would entail ignoring a lot of the feedback that your body would be giving you, telling you to stop, because your body has various systems in place to maintain homeostasis, to try and reduce these stressors. And so you might work out really hard for a couple weeks and you feel maybe, a little too hard, that your body's not quite recovering fully. And then you might feel you might go into the gym and you feel like really bad about working out. You just don't want to work out. Or you work out and you have all these nagging itty bitty little pains, or your muscles are a little too sore when you're deadlifting or something like that. These things are all signs from your body. That doesn't mean that they are a sign that you should drop everything and run, but they are signs that maybe you're going a little too hard and that you should pay attention and cut back a little bit. And so being overtrained, or getting to a state that is legitimate overtraining, you would have to ignore a lot of the symptoms that your body is producing to discourage you from continuing to do that. Like, again, in my example with the, just squatting singles at 90% until you break a bone. I mean, I can tell you that I've done 10 sets of, I think, doubles or so at 90%, and by the time I've done with 10, my muscles are so sore that it feels, it's almost painful. And that's a sign that I should stop. Absolutely. So I stop. You'd have to ignore, in some cases, probably literal physical pain telling you to back off. And of course, that also means that if you were to actually achieve a state of real overtraining, this would require a very long and dedicated period of recovery. You couldn't just recover in a few days. It would take you months. You would have to cut back in volume for months. You would have to take it easy for a very long time in order to recover. And you would also have to get psychological analysis. You would have to get attention. You would have to actually see someone to kind of help you deal with that stress. And I think that because of that, it's very likely that this would only ever happen with world-class athletes, because those are the only types of people who are really that dedicated or that stubborn or that boneheaded that they would actually push themselves to that limit. You certainly get, it's certainly possible that someone who's not a world-class athlete could do that to themselves, certainly. But I don't think that it would be very likely, simply because the only people who really have the sort of drive to ignore stuff like that are often world-class athletes who, again, they're good at pushing themselves hard. That's how they get there.
And I think it's also certainly possible that it could happen with certain regular gym goers who have very extreme goals and are very dedicated to those goals. If you imagine, say, a model whose job depends on looking very good, and so they starve themselves to lose weight. They spend endless hours in the gym to burn more calories. Those are certainly the types of people that could happen to as well.
So of course we would expect that they would be the ones to get there in the first place. They might, for example, maybe you have a football player. He's playing on a team. His team is counting on him. He has to work really hard in the gym. He also has to do training on the field every day. And so maybe he ignores a lot of the signs that he should be slowing down or maybe taking a little bit more rest. And he decides that he just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, and then more likely he'll hurt himself. Football is, can be a very dangerous sport, but it's also possible that he might really reach a state of overtraining. And that's another sort of thing about overtraining, is that I think it's more likely that this would happen in the gym as opposed to sort of like a field sport, simply because with field sports, very, very often what happens is that you injure yourself and you have to take some time off. Whereas the gym in general is much safer. It's actually really safe to lift weights or to go running compared to sort of injury rates that you see in even like basketball or soccer. Simply because in basketball or soccer or any field sport, you're running around, you can't really predict what's going to happen or how someone's going to hit you or exactly how everything's going to go. And there's a lot more physical contact involved, and so it's very easy to hurt yourself, or relatively very easy. Whereas in the gym, you can really control all of those factors. So you can control how much weight you're using. You generally will know what a safe weight is relative to what you've done in the past and what you think you can handle, what an appropriate progression would be. And it's the same with running. Again, certainly running can be very stressful on the bones, on the joints, and it's a lot of repetitive pounding. But at the end of the day, since it's so repetitive, your body can get used to it more than simply an unpredictable force like you might experience on the field. So it's very likely that this would happen with world-class athletes, maybe not necessarily field athletes, although it's certainly possible, I would say, but world-class athletes who train for competitions where where they spend a lot of time training in the gym and then a small amount, a relatively small amount of time performing, which is to say people like powerlifters, bodybuilders, runners, etc., who may just do a couple competitions a year. And additionally, I want to kind of go into the psychological element of stuff a little bit more. In Squat Every Day, everyone knows that I love the book Squat Every Day by Matt Perryman. Matt Perryman does a huge discussion about recovery. What recovery is, and how different things work. And he suggests that overtraining might just be related to depression, or it might be related to a similar sort of psychological issue. And he points out that the symptoms are relatively similar, and that if you took a depressed person and tried to get them to work out, or if they were working out and were also depressed, that the effects would be similar. And that also explains why it would be so rare, because that would make overtraining literally a form of exercise-induced depression, extreme exercise-induced depression. I think that that's maybe not what it is. It's certainly possible that that's what it is. I think that's a better way of looking at it than sort of the way that we are talking about it in the fitness industry, certainly. I think that we are talking about it in a way that's sort of jokey or not very serious, or we're not really thinking about it in the right ways. I think that it should be a serious topic if we're going to discuss it. And I think that, again, it is a rarity. So it should be taken, again, seriously and not treated like some sort of everyday common occurrence topic of debate. So overall, as I've said, my opinion is that overtraining certainly seems to be a possibility. I wouldn't say that it's a certainty, but again, if it is real, it is definitely rare. And again, to review, I think that it should be approached with a lot more nuance than it typically is today. Everyone obviously is entitled to sort of their own opinions on what overtraining is, and we have plenty of different opinions on what overtraining is. I've brought out a few quotes to sort of to show that. But I think that very often what people are talking about is not really overtraining. They're talking about acute issues with recovery and not long-term issues with recovery, which is what overtraining really should be. So that is all that I have for this week. As always, if you like us, comment, share, talk about it on Facebook, tell me that you think I'm wrong, whatever you want to do. Support us in any way you can. And have a good weekend. I'm about to be going to XOXO Festival in Portland this weekend with my girlfriend. And that is a tech festival. Obviously, by the time you guys hear this podcast, it will already be over. But hopefully, I will be having a blast this weekend. So I will talk to you guys all in the future. Have a good one. Hi everyone, Adam here again. I really hope that you've enjoyed this week's podcast. Here at Philosopher Warrior, I am all about body positive fitness. To me, that means learning to be strong and healthy and happy in your body without having to worry about losing weight or fitting into societal standards of what beauty should be. If you like what I do here, I would absolutely love it if you could support me in any way possible. After all, making content is difficult, and making and editing a podcast can often take 5 or more hours just to get you guys a half hour of free content. So here are a few ways that you can do that thing. First, check out my blog at www.gains.af. That is GAINS.af, which is packed full of plenty more free posts for those of you who are more into reading words and stuff. You can also sign up for the mailing list. This means that you're getting alerted to all the newest content as it's released. Along with that, you get a free copy of the Gains ebook, which contains a 12-week program designed to help beginners get stronger, bigger, and more durable. The book also comes with a 12-week mailing program designed to educate you on many of the basic principles underlying good training. So it's great for beginners looking to learn a lot more about how to train as well. Second thing you can do, you can purchase my ebooks, also through www.gains.af. Aside from the free Gains ebook, you can also find my first ebook, The Uplift Method, which lays out my exercise philosophy and explores what I think about mind-body exercise and how it's crucial to any good exercise program, even though I have some, pretty big criticisms of it. For those interested in fantasy stuff, I'm also a huge fantasy nerd. I have a novella about vampires that I wrote a while back, and you should check that out. It is short, it is cheap, and it is awesome. Third and last thing you can do, you can support me with a small monthly donation through the Gains Patreon at www.patreon.com/gains. You can also find that through the gains.af site. At just $1 a month, you can get a copy of the Gains ebook and access to the Gains Facebook community. At $10, you get a copy of Uplift, again, that is the Uplift Method, as well. At $25, you get a t-shirt. At $60, you get access to semi-personalized group coaching. So I will be writing programs for you and a bunch of other people at the same time, and you get some other stuff with that as well. At $100, you can get fully customized individual coaching. That is right. I will write your programs for you and keep on you regularly to see how it's going via email or text. So, above all, if you like the content, please share. Let people know about the good news of intersectional body positive fitness and direct them our way. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. If you ever want to reach out to me, my email is ae.fisher.gains@gmail.com. If you want to hear about a particular topic, let me know. Reach out to me and I'll share what knowledge I have. Hey, guess what? You're awesome, and thank you.